Name it live. Hello guys. I don't know if you can hear me. If you can hear me, just respond so we start. Okay, good. You will understand that there is a small delay between the video and the chat. You see that I answer faster in the chat on the video. So I don't know who here is following from my previous session that I did 1 hour ago, that I finished 1 hour ago, and who's new. So I would like to, can you please state who is on Capstone 1 and who is on Capstone 2? If you can respond on if you can respond on chat, please, so that I have some idea about if all of you are on Capstone 2 or Capstone 1, because we will continue from where we left on the previous session. So if you're on Capstone 1, you can just follow my previous session, which I'm going to find and paste you here. So, okay. So those of you who are interested in watching Capstone 1, please go through the link that I just shared. Now, as I said before completing Capstone 1, one of the requirements was to take into account all the rubics of Capstone 2. And we're going to go on Capstone 2 now, rubic, which is the last rubic requirement of Capstone 1 as well. So what we're going to do on this session here is cover Capstone 2 rubic, talk about a few strategies, talk about a few pitfalls, and cover most of the frequently asked questions as I'm aware of at the moment. We will be here for 1 hour. For the remaining hour, we will answer questions on Slack. Mostly because I am intending to do this as a presentation, as a talk, rather than a frequently asked question, rather than an AMA session. I will most likely miss many of your questions typed here. I will try to follow those questions if I can, but mostly not to lose my thinking and my speaking. I will try to make this as a talk. So I'm sorry if I don't answer all your questions immediately, but we will have another 1 hour just for questions after this. So long story short, let me not waste more of your time. I will switch into my screen now so that we see how we can continue from where we left off from the previous study jam that was completed 1 hour ago. All right, so 1 sec to see how I switch to my screen and stop seeing my ugly face. Bum, bum, bum. Okay. Um, you should normally now see my screen. Which is okay. So you should normally see my the last requirement from Capstone 1, rubic. This is where we stopped. And the Capstone 1 rubric says that the app design specification demonstrates implementing all features required for Project 7, which is Capstone Stage 2. So before you finish up with Capstone 1, as we stopped 1 hour ago, you will need to be aware of the rubrics for Capstone 2. And those rubrics we're going to go through line by line. So trying to make a few answer a few frequently asked questions about those rubrics, and I hope you will find it all useful. What I'm about to say here is that this session is not about answering specific project questions, but mostly about approaches to some strategies and common things that uh, most people ask about the specific part stage of Capstone mostly. So I will not be able to focus on one person's problem on a specific thing, but I will try to approach Capstone 2 as a general. For questions of that type, we will try to help as much as possible on the second part, which will be the Slack questions. Now, um, here, uh, now we go into Capstone Stage 2. All right. So, firstly, I'd like to say that you have plenty of time to completing a very big capstone. 3 weeks is more than enough, and you should be very confident about the time you have. I've seen many people who submitted a simple capstone 1 scenario, but they were able to build their capstone 2 project in a week or 10 days or so. So trust me, you have plenty of time. If you haven't submitted your Capstone 1, try to don't overdo it with features, because as it is obviously written in the requirements of Capstone 2, you normally have to submit the implementation of your Capstone 1 specification. So be a little modest on that. Don't overdo it, so that you don't race with time. Try to strip your Capstone 1 features to the necessary ones, so that you just cover the rubric for Capstone 2, so that you don't so that you can make it by the August 15th. Now, if you're already, of course, on Capstone 2, then you just need to be careful with your implementation. And here we will go now with this. Now, uh, about this first part, it's okay. It's something that we don't need to stay a long time to it. Okay, your application should conform to the common standards found in the guidelines, which is that your app shouldn't crash, that intended buttons shouldn't be replaced with custom buttons, like pressing the back button should be the system's back button and not a back button that you will implement yourself to replace it, and so on. Okay. Then obviously we go with the obvious stuff that as you had in your statement in Capstone 1, you will need to also implement in Java language your content. Okay, we know that. And you shouldn't make use of any beta versions of uh, libraries, or shouldn't use Canary channel for your Android Studio and stuff. So you should stick to the uh, stable versions. Okay, so let's get into the more serious stuff. Now, your app integrates a third-party library. Trust me, if you implement even just one third-party library, that's enough. To make it clear, when we talk about third-party libraries, we don't mean Google libraries. That's why we say third-party libraries. So even if you have Google Play libraries, because it's part of your requirements, and Firebase libraries, you shouldn't consider that these are third-party libraries. Even just one library that is not Google library should be enough. So if you're using retrofit, the retrofit, you're done with that. Or if you're using icons, and I find it most easy thing that every application should have at least one icon at some place. Then using Glide or using Picasso will pass you this requirement as it is a third-party library. So this should be fairly easy, even if we're talking just for a single library. So just use Picasso to load an icon. Okay, you're done. So you're clear with this. Now, the second one, app validates all input from servers and users. If data does not exist or it is in the wrong format, the app logs this fact and does not crash. Okay, so your app shouldn't crash. Okay, so this is also easy. Try to check if your app works okay in airplane mode while you rotate. Try it using some different circumstances and make sure that the app doesn't crash. Also, as we did at the baking app project, there was one condition of a recipe that, if I remember, a video was on an icon, or on an icon was in a video, something like that, so it wouldn't validate. In that case, you had to take into account that thing so that you make sure that your app doesn't crash. So if you have things like data validation, let's say you download some feeds from the web or something, then just make sure that under different circumstances, your app would work and it wouldn't crash. Okay? Now, which also has to do with the first part here on the general guidelines that says that your app should conform to these guidelines, which is doesn't crash. So this is more like the same thing. Okay. Now, app includes support for accessibility. Okay, here is something that some people might find confusing. What do we mean that it has support for accessibility? Well, it definitely means many things, but in particular, it says here that we should have content descriptions, navigation using D-pad, and if applicable, non-audio version of audio cues. So if you have audio cues, make sure that you have non-audio versions of that. Most people wouldn't have that, so we will mostly focus on these two parts, those things here, which is the content descriptions and the navigation using the D-pad. Now, when we talk about that, we mean that content descriptions is simply, as it says, content descriptions. Make sure that all your icons have content descriptions. If you do that, you are okay. You're on the safe side. What about navigation using the D-pad? D-pads, I don't know if you remember some older phones, I had an HTC such phone. It was HTC Magic, where it had some buttons, which was like a joystick. Okay, so you should make sure that your applications, if you make some joystick usage, works as intended. It doesn't jump into various different locations that don't make sense. Now, how we approach that? Well, lucky for you, if you don't do anything, it's most likely okay, because Android is smart enough to realize the your app, let's say, configuration, and while you navigate, it will take you normally from one place to the other using a tab or using an arrow. However, if you want to control this, or if you see that it doesn't work very well, I have here a link for D-pad, which I'm going to paste now on D-pad navigation, and I paste it. Okay, so you should have this link on the chat as well. Here, you will see with this specific page, that how you can approach the D-pad philosophy. Here, you will actually do it in your XML layout, where you can have you can say which one is the focus up, focus down, focus left, focus right. So if you orient up, down, left, or right, you will be able to see that focus down will take me from the button 1 to edit text 1, for example. Or also focus down from the button 2 will take me to edit text 1, but going left, it will take me back to button 1. So you can show which navigation buttons would take you from one, let's say, from one element to another, okay, from one view to another. Also, you should have in mind the focus forward. Okay, the focus forward is, as we would say, the tab button. On your PC, when you press the tab button, it takes your focus from one element to the next, not pressing right or left button, but the tab button. Okay, so the equivalent to tab button is the focus forward. Okay, so with the focus forward, you can show on your D-pad how to go from one control to the next, not to its right or its left, to the next. So the long story short, for D-pad, you have next, focus forward, and you also have the down, right, left, up, and so on. Okay, as you see here. So I will not stay more time here. I believe that you should have enough understanding about implementing D-pad for your accessibility. But again, I'm telling you, before you do that, try using your emulator and check if it works okay without the need to specify all these things in your XML, because you might just be lucky and have it working fine. For example, in my implementation of my own Capstone, I didn't have to use D-pad because it worked fine when I checked it. So I didn't have to go through all this in my XML. But if it doesn't work, this is how you implement D-pad joystick, generally, implementation in your apps. Okay? Now, let's move forward. So, content descriptions, simply put on your icons, for each of your icons, a description of what it is. Okay? And there you go with D-pad. Other than that, you can have your own accessibility options. For example, I put on my own Capstone the ability of TTS, text-to-speech. So while I built a news application, those who were visually impaired could simply listen to the articles rather than reading them. Also, I included day and night themes. So that way, if some people with epilepsy or with problems with bright screens and stuff, they could simply turn into night mode, which was easier for them to read. Okay, so I did a day-night theme and text-to-speech, for example, on top of the content descriptions and dpad for my accessibility. Now, as I showed on my previous session, into the statements, I had a statement that the application of your Capstone one, you need to put a statement that your application will store its strings into the strings XML, colors into colors XML, and so on. And that is because this is asked in this part of rubic of stage 2. So as I said, those on stage 1, look at this. This requirement on stage 2 makes you on stage 1 having to write this thing as a statement that all strings will be at strings XML and so on. Okay? So when it comes now to the implementation, of course, you shouldn't have strings sitting around inside your code. Everything should be in your strings XML. And if you are making languages, if you're making applications that refer to foreign languages, for example, I built an application that was a newsreader getting local news from a Greek news vendor. Okay, so it was obviously a Greek application, but how would my reviewer deal with that? I mean, how would he know? How would he play with that? How would he know what categories, what options I have into my preferences and stuff? Well, in that case, if you are not making an application in English, it would be better if you make translations. And I will try, let me see if I can show this to you into my Android Studio at the moment. So let me switch a little bit and let me change the screen share. One sec. See how I can get into Android Studio. Not the emulator. All right. All right. So here we are on my actual Capstone project. What I want to do is go here into the resources folder and go, as you see, you have some, I have the values of English and Greek. Okay, so I have the strings XML, which is all the strings that I used in my application. As you can see, they are here, some of which are translatable, okay, like how I call home in English and in Greek. So I say that home, it is a translatable string, but the home ID is translatable false, so the ID doesn't need to be translated. Then when you go here and you go open translations editor, you will be able to make the equivalent versions of your translatable strings, those which are not marked as translatable false. You will be able to then change those strings and translate them to your own language. So that way you will be able to provide a Capstone version of a Capstone project that has both English versions so that your reviewers can correct, but also into your own language so that your audience can also read. Okay, now let me switch back to the original screen. Which was this one. Okay. All right. So I hope we are okay with that. And now the app provides a widget to provide relevant information to the user or the home screen. Okay, that is obvious. You have to implement a widget. There are cases, like I discussed with a person, where he wasn't very confident about building the widget the way he described it with his mocks and in his general, let's say, specifications of P6. So he asked me, can I do something simpler with my widget? I mean, I said that it will be like this on the on uh, on the specification, but I had to do something simpler. Well, the answer is yes. You don't have to be 100% accurate to your Capstone 1 description. You can deviate from that. Unfortunately, I cannot tell you how much you can deviate because I don't have a official answer on that. However, I am waiting for an official answer because it is a frequently asked question that I expect to hear. So I asked from the official support to get an answer. I don't have it yet, but I will post it on the P7 channel as soon as I have the official answer. However, I can tell you that there are people that implemented even a different project from P6 and they have passed. However, keep that with some, with some extra salt because that's what I've heard. I don't want you to deviate a lot from your Capstone 1 and think that you're safe. It's a small gambling because people say that on Capstone 2, people just, the reviewers just check if you, let's say, if you follow the Capstone 2 rubic, and following the Capstone 2 rubic is enough. And that's true. But I would say to be safe, if you haven't yet submitted Capstone 1, try to implement to submit a Capstone 1 that you can actually implement. Don't gamble with it. Okay? So the answer is that yes, you can deviate to some degree, even enough, but don't overdo it. I'm just saying that, keep that in mind, okay? For example, for my Capstone, I try to stay 100% on stage 1. So when I implement stage 2, it was 100% implementation of stage 1, and I wasn't any anxious about it. But again, don't take my word for it, but you can deviate to a big degree. So even if you cannot make, for example, your widget 100% and to make it simpler, then just do it. As long as as long as you're on the rubic and you make a widget, do it. Okay. So there's a person who wanted to put who had a list view on his mockup, but ended up with a text view of repeated lines, just as we had it on our baking app. And I think it was okay for him. Okay, so let's go here into the Google Play services. Into the Google Play services, we have this, which says that the app should integrate 2 or more Google services. And look at it, it didn't say Google Play services. It talks about Google services, okay? Which means that this includes Firebase. So don't feel trapped that you have to implement 2 or more Google Play services, okay? As it says, it can be from both Play and Firebase. Now, each service should be imported into your build Gradle. just as the libraries, okay? Obviously, otherwise it won't work. Now, here there is a set of services described from Google Play, but trust me, you don't need to have one or more of these. These are just some suggestions. You could have something entirely different. For example, you could use Firebase's FCM, Firebase Cloud Messaging and Remote Configuration, which is not in this list, and you would still pass. Okay. However, let me tell you that like something that you can do very easily. AdMob is something very easy to implement and very easy to put it on actually any application. So go for AdMob because it is one of the two services which is very easy to do. A second service that is not listed here is actually the analytics service, where you simply can have your analytics service and fire at a few key points, like user clicked on this, user clicked on that location, so you can have some analytics. So the analytics is very, 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 very easy to add, and together with the AdMob, you should be okay covering the two Google services. Okay. Other than that, I would tell you that there's a plethora of Google services, and I would tell you to go see what's available. And as I earlier mentioned, FCM, something very good to have is Firebase Cloud Messaging, so that you have an application that can actually notify users. It's a very useful service. And another very, very, very useful service from Firebase is actually the Firebase remote configuration. If you add the Firebase remote config into your app, you will be able to change some of setups remotely without having to update your applications into your Google Play. So, for instance, for the application that I did, okay, I had two live streams, one live radio stream and one live TV stream, okay, combined with the feed from the newsreader that I built. Now, those live streams utilized with Exoplayer had the following thing. For example, the radio comes from a source which for some reason might change tomorrow. So let's say that we change the radio source of our stream to a new vendor. That would force me to release a new application on Google Play just for a URL that is changed. Okay, and all those who wouldn't update immediately wouldn't be able to listen to the radio streamlet, for example. Okay, but by having the remote configuration is actually similar to shared preferences, which are actually managed remotely. So, for example, the URL from which I get the live radio stream, I have it on a remote configuration variable. So if tomorrow I read my radio stream from another vendor, because let's say I found a cheaper vendor for my streaming, then I will simply change the remote config to the new one about the radio streaming URL, and I don't need to update my application on Google Play. So have that in mind. It's a very, very useful and also easy to implement feature, which is actually similar to shared preferences, which are managed remotely by you. Okay, so let's continue. Material design. Well, about material design, the things are very simple here. It's one of the simplest, let's say, parts of our course. Obviously, you need to extend from AppCompat, but I believe that even if you create a default application, your activity your application will extend from AppCompat anyway. So it's something that you don't even need to implement yourself. Just create a new Android Studio application and you have it. App uses app bar and associated toolbars. There's not much I can say about that. You know what it is, and you simply should utilize that. Then we go into standard and simple transitions between activities. One thing that you can do is that means that you should have at least 2 activities. Now, listen that requirement alone shows that, again, I say that your app should have at least 2 activities. Otherwise, it's impossible to have a transition between them. So it doesn't matter if you have 3, 4, 5 activities. I heard somebody, my app will have 3 activities. Is that simple enough? Uh, uh, should I make it more complicated? I said, no, as long as you have at least 2 activities, you are okay. So have at least 2 activities. One very easy implementation is for doing this transition to use a shared element transitions and have one icon from activity 1, which then magnifies as you transit to activity 2. So that would be, let me get into here. I'm showing you here my Capstone 1, and let me see where if I have a transition somewhere. Okay, here. For example, I have a transition here. So when I click on the article, it takes me from the main activity to the detail activity with a shared element transition. Okay. Let me go back to the rubic. Building. App builds from a clean repository with no additional configuration. What does this mean? It means that your app shouldn't have any steps required to build other than just build it. Okay, so that's very simple. Now, there are people who tell me if that means that using some API that you cannot include in your GitHub blocks this part of your requirement. I will tell you that it shouldn't. That's what I've heard, of course. So before doing that, ask your mentor. But to my knowledge, this doesn't mean, this doesn't include cases like foreign APIs. Okay, so you should be okay with that, even if your application requires a foreign API, because what you can do is that your app will build. It may not run, it may give you a message saying that please provide an API without a crash. Okay, you haven't provided an API. So the app will build, okay, and the app would run, and its result would be please start again with your API. Okay, so that doesn't block you from submitting a project where you pass secretly the API key to your reviewer, because your app builds anyway. It just gives you a message and says goodbye after that message if you don't have the API key. All right. Now, the app builds and deploys using install release Gradle task. What is the install release Gradle task? Now, in order to see what it is, I will need to take you again back into Android Studio, so you see what I mean. Let me take you into Android Studio for a moment. All right. You should normally see my screen right now. I don't know if you look at my screen. All right. Okay. So what we actually mean is that when you open Gradle here and you go into install release and you double click it, your app should compile normally. Okay, so in order to do so, you need to set up your key stores. Okay, which we will get there in a moment. But know that once you set up your key stores and you set it for the release version, when you double click into the install release, everything should go smoothly. And to do it, you just need to go to Gradle, app, install, and then install release and double click here. So doing that satisfies your rubic. Now let me get again back into the web page. One sec to get back to the rubic. All right. So in order for this task which I showed you, which you will run to succeed, you need to satisfy this part here, which says app is equipped with a signing configuration. Now, about this part, one sec. All right, for this part, you should have this, which I'm going to put right now as a link into our chat. Okay, now I will put it again with a title, Key Store. Okay, it's the same link. I just put something like a title about the key store. So if you see here, and this is an official answer, which was answered by Nico, it says that in Rubic we have those two requirements. App builds and deploys using install release, which I just said, how you press it, and app is equipped with a signing configuration, and the key store and passwords are included in the repository. Key store is referred by relative path. So how do we do all this? You will see that Nico answered that you need to define signing configs here, and you should declare the build types. And that way, you have also satisfied the install release task. Now, if I may go into my Android Studio again, and again, don't worry, I've put the link up for this into the chat, so you should be okay. So one sec to move again into Android Studio, see on my Capstone the equivalency. And oh, where is it? Okay, sure. Oh, here, sorry. Okay. Here, and let me shrink that. I have my signing configs. Okay. I've stored my key store into a relative path, which is one level down, and it is found in the key store JKS, which is created once you want to build and generate the assigned APK. When you do that, if you don't have a key store, you create it and save it in the relative path. And for that, you will provide the key alias and the password. Here I had, for example, for my Capstone project, the key alias as Capstone and the password as Udacity, and the store password as Udacity again. So that's all you need to have. And then you're done. Okay? So again, I'm jumping to back to the slides. One sec to jump again back to the slides. I hope you find the talk useful to the moment. One sec. Okay, we should be back. All right. Yeah. And all app dependencies are managed by Gradle. Okay. You don't actually need to do anything for that. Okay. Now, we come to the last part, which is about data persistence. Those of you doing your Capstone now, you are lucky because you can use both Room and content providers. When I submitted mine, it was one of the rubic things was that we were not allowed to use Room. So a couple of days before I submitted, they changed the rubric, but it was too late for me to change it back to Room, so I did it with content providers. Now, however, whatever makes you more comfortable to work with, this is the one you should follow. The thing is that you should definitely include some persistence. You should definitely save in a way something somewhere, even if that is via web service in Firebase, or if you make a local storage. I will, however, tell you that you should implement one of those three. One of the three that you should implement is actually that if you regularly pull or send data to some service, app updates in cache regularly should be done with a single adapter or job dispatcher. What I did was follow those two. Okay. What I did was make an intent service to store data and make an async task to pull data. Also, the way I did it, I tried to make it very visible to the reviewer how it works. So I made two different classes for that. And let me just show you again back into Android Studio how I did it in order to follow me on this. So let's get back here. Now, here you will see that I have the storage intent service and the storage retrieval async task. Now, you might say that, oh, they say that I should have an async task, so I cannot use loader. No, that's not true. I use the loader to download my feeds from the web, and I just used an async task to retrieve feeds from the database. So you can combine things the way you want them. For the storage intent service, okay, what I did, I had an intent service to which I was sending the 20 most recent articles of each category to be saved for offline reading. And then if I was in an offline mode, that is, if I didn't have a 3G or Wi-Fi, then I was using this async task to pull from the database with a content provider the stored articles of each category. Okay, so that way I made two distinct classes which satisfied those two conditions. That didn't stop me from using loaders, because as I said, into my article list activity, I had a loader where, let me find where I have everything. I need to rebuild it. As you see, there are some errors. The errors actually, it's that I haven't built it now. I think it's here. Yes, as you see, I have a loader here, okay, an async task loader, which I use with retrofit, okay, and in here I did whatever I liked, but I also had to use an async task, not an async task loader. Well, this didn't stop me. At this part of the code, I used what I wanted. And for my storage and retrieval, I used the, here, the storing the articles with an intent service and retrieving the articles with an async task. So it was easily done. Let me switch again. All right. Another thing is that, okay, if you use a content provider that I did, then I use the loader to move data to its views. Okay, so I had the loader as well. If you use Room, then later live data and view model are used to when required to do unnecessary calls to the database and so on. Okay, so I hope this thing is clear. One thing that you might wonder is, how can this be, let's say, reviewed in the minimum time? And how can the reviewer know for a project that he has no clue about what your key points are? Because, okay, I made those two classes, but I wanted to make sure that the reviewer will understand this. Well, what I did, and I got my project reviewed in only 3 hours, was to accompany it with a document, this document that I wrote for the Udacity reviewer, app documentation for the Udacity reviewer. So what I did with this document, I showed how I approached everything on Capstone 1, and then for the rubic approach of Capstone 2 that he was actually let's say reviewing, I said I highlighted the things that I did. So I said, for example, one part was that app integrates 2 or more Google services. Okay, so I told him, don't be tired. I have used AdMob, I used Analytics, I used Firebase services for remote config and FCM. Okay. Then for another rubic requirement that says, if content provider is used, the app uses a loader to move data to its views. Then I said that in article list activity at line 452, I have the sync task loader that I just showed you. And if I fetch type to a favorites, so if I don't just store something onto my latest articles, but I have put an article as a favorite. Then I use a content provider to move it to the SQLite. Okay. Then it says you must implement one of the three, the ones that I told you. So I said, okay, I'm implementing the intent service at the storage service Java, and then I'm implementing the async task using the storage retrieval async task Java. So the reviewer already knew where to find everything. If you include a document that helps a reviewer do his job faster, you will get an ultra fast response on your project. And that way you will succeed much faster, or you will get your feedback much faster. Okay? So this is what I wanted to say for Capstone 2. I hope it wasn't very boring, and I hope that I have answered most of your questions. I see no questions here so far. Is there any questions that should be answered on live stream chat here before we move into Slack? And are you still all alive, or have you slept listening to my boring voice? Okay, I see no responses, so I guess that you either have no questions, so I was very good, or you all slept, so I was very boring. All right, I got an Isabella saying thank you. I thank you very much, Isabella, for being here with us. Um, Well, I guess that concludes the talk about approaching the rubic and the strategies for Capstone project implementation, Capstone 2. I want to thank you all so much for being here, and we will now continue together with Hannah at the Slack channel to answer any possible questions that we can possibly answer. I want you to give me about 4 to 5 minutes break before we continue into Slack, so that I get my head up and running again. And I will be in 5 minutes in Slack to do whatever I can for you. Okay? Thank you all for being here.